Hello, and welcome to this month's special edition of the Simon Says Expert Series. I'm Candace Gwaltney, Associate Director of Communications at the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center. I'm honored to join Dr. Kelvin Lee today as we answer your questions about what's happening inside the Cancer Center. Dr. Lee has just recently celebrated his 5-year anniversary as director of the Indiana University Melvin and Bryn Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center. Along with being the director, he has a research lab focused on multiple myeloma. Thanks for joining me, Dr. Lee.
Thanks, Candace, and thanks for everybody online watching us today. This was a little bit impromptu, but we really wanted to go ahead and get your questions answered about the Cancer Center.
Yeah, so before we dive into questions, could you just start with giving us a short overview of the Cancer Center?
Certainly. So the Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center is one of two cancer centers that are NCI designated in the state of Indiana. One of them is here at IU, and the other one is at Purdue. Purdue is a basic science cancer center, so they don't have a clinical arm. We are known as a matrix center, so we actually have cancer center members from 43 different departments and 12 schools that are part of the cancer center. And the Cancer Center really is a community of researchers and clinicians and all sorts of educators that are interested in cancer and cancer research. So we bring all those folks together and move that forward with our organization. And we partner very closely with IU Health over the last 5 years, really to bring cutting edge research and education into the clinical space. So all of our patients benefit from that. And all of our patients and families and everybody else really is known as our catchment area. And our catchment area is the entire state of Indiana.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee. That was great. And to those watching, we're excited to answer your questions today. I want to make sure we address as many as possible. But before we dive in with those pre-submitted questions, I want to invite everyone watching to submit their questions either in the comment box below, or if you're joining us on Facebook, you can add those to the chat. So we're going to do our best to cover as many as possible before we finish up.
Candace is supposed to cut me off if I start to drone on. So she'll go like this or something, so.
Yeah, we will try to move as fast as we can. So this first question, though, you kind of touched on it, but I'm going to ask it anyway so that you can kind of clarify some of this. So what makes a comprehensive cancer center different than other research institutions, and what exactly does comprehensive mean?
So there are two parts to that. So we are a National Cancer Institute, NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. So the first part is that there are only, I think, about 53 or 59 NCI designated cancer centers, which means that the National Cancer Institute, which is the federal agency that really oversees cancer research across the United States, to become a cancer center, you actually have to pass a test. You actually have to put in a large grant that explains your research, how you actually catalyze research, how you distribute it, how you move that research into patients. And the NCI actually sends a team of researchers from all over the country, from other cancer centers, to actually do what is known as a site visit. So they come down every 5 years. They come to your campus and you present to them for 2 days. This in the cancer center world is known as the Inquisition. But you get grilled about everything you're doing and how you're really making an impact for the people in your catchment area. So it's the good housekeeping seal of cancer research and education in the United States. To be an NCI designated cancer center. To be comprehensive means that you actually, as a cancer center, are able to do everything from stem to stern, everything from the basic science all the way to clinical trials, all the way to population studies and prevention. And so you have to demonstrate that aspect during the site visit, and then you're awarded a comprehensive designation also.
Great. So kind of jumping off from there. So Can you share a little bit more about the overall state of cancer care in Indiana? And then also, how does being in Indiana shape the Cancer Center's research and how it serves our population in that catchment area you talked about?
So I think that cancer care in Indiana is very much like cancer care across the country. I think that there are areas, certainly here at the Cancer Center, where you really have the cutting edge, the newest clinical trials, the newest technology available, and then across the entire state. I mean, the one of the strengths of our cancer center is that our affiliation with IU Health, which has 17 hospitals and clinics across the state of Indiana delivering cancer care. So there's cancer care all over the place. And that's all good. I think that there is, of course, like across the United States, there's heterogeneity in the kind of care, depending on whether or not you're in a big city or in a small town or in a rural community, that we are working very hard to to actually say a cancer care in a small town is going to be as good with the same access to clinical trials and other, cutting edge technology and approaches as it is downtown Indy. So that is one of our objectives. The other objective is to say, all right, if people can't come to us, let's go to them, right? And that is really the driver of the mobile low dose lung cancer screening CT that is now, I think, a year, has been on the road for a year, has done remarkable work driving across the state of Indiana, especially to areas that don't have access to the ability to do CT screening for lung cancer, driving to those areas and making that service and that technology and that care available for people who live in those communities.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you mentioned IU Health, Dr. Lee, and many people assume that the Cancer Center is part of IU Health or the same as IU Health. Can you explain a little bit more about how the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center is different, the role it plays in cancer research, and how we work together?
Yeah, I would say, it's so there are, to go back to the kinds of cancer centers, there are actually two kinds of cancer centers, broadly speaking. There are the standalone cancer centers, which are everything is all in one place. So the classic example of that is MD Anderson down in Houston or Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City, where the hospital, the research, the education is all under one cancer center. For the vast majority of other cancer centers, the cancer center tends to be the research and education piece, and the clinical care piece, which is where where IU Health is usually separate. And that has always been sort of a challenge to sort of merge those things together, because as we say, in this day and age, if you're a cancer patient and you don't have access to clinical trials, which are really moving the field forward incredibly quickly, if you don't have access to those trials, you are getting second-rate medicine. So a big push over the last 5 years is really to have the IU Health and the Cancer Center, which is on the School of Medicine side, partner and work very closely together to make that possible, to move our research into our patients. And that really has gone, I think it's gone very well. I think the leadership has been very all aligned to make that happen. And I think we're making great progress there.
Yeah. Okay, so this next question, the person who submitted it, first of all, wanted to give a big shout out to the MOVE program and the Complete Life program. So we love that.
Yep.
And so their question was, what will be the impact on cancer centers as an increasing number of patients are living years after their initial diagnosis?
That's a great question. And so I think we have two things there. We have one, people that have beat their cancer, but and are now survivors. And one of the great examples of that is actually here at Indiana University, because 50 years ago, Larry Einhorn cured testicular cancer. So a devastating disease for young men, 95% fatal. Larry's program and research came up with a protocol and an approach that really cures now 95% of young men. The challenge is that they are now going to live for, they have a great long life ahead of them, but they have all the side effects of the treatment that they have gotten. So lots of research has been ongoing with Dr. Einhorn, with Dr. Travis, about looking at how to manage those side effects from people that have been cured. And I think that that's going to be a bigger and bigger piece of the care that we deliver. And as part of that, we have just recruited Dr. Chris Nelson, who is coming to us from Memorial Sloan Kettering to lead the Walther Center for Supportive Oncology, with the idea that we'll take all the things that are wrap around the patient, not just their treatment, but all the things, nutrition, psychology, emotional support, social services, and wrap those around the patient in an integrated fashion, and also determine which approaches are better. What's the best way to deliver this? The second piece of that is that we have now new therapies that may not cure somebody of their cancer, like that means that the cancer is gone, but allows them to live a perfectly normal life with cancer. So instead of saying, hey, cancer, we need to cure you, or, it's boom or bust, we actually now have a whole a treatment philosophy in a number of cancers in which we can actually turn cancer into a chronic disease. So for people with high blood pressure or diabetes, we don't cure you, right? We give you medications to allow you to live a perfectly normal life with that chronic disease. And so there's a major approach really to turn cancer into a chronic disease that we can manage with the fewest number of side effects. But then that actually feeds into sort of our need to understand, what are those side effects? What's the best way to manage this? What's the best approach to do that? So that's a very exciting area that I think a lot of cancers, including our cancer centers, including ours, are very much invested in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very excited about the Walther Center. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about cancer research. So, when people hear cancer research, what do you wish they better understood?
I wish they understood how often we fail. My mentor, Craig Thompson, who was the previous CEO at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I knew him when he was my mentor when I was at the University of Michigan, national basketball, national collegiate national champions in basketball. Craig said, 10% for regular scientists like us, and he wasn't a regular scientist, he was a genius, but regular scientists like us, about 10% of what we do works. Okay. For people that win the Nobel Prize, about 20% of what they do works, which means that 80% of what they do as a Nobel laureate doesn't work. So 4 out of the 5 things that we do every day fail. And one of the things that, and you never know that by watching television, right? You watch TV and they sequence the human genome in 3 hours, right? And it's like, it's like, no, it is a long slog and it can be very discouraging. And this is why, the community support, our philanthropic support it's actually more important that we know that there are people that are out there wishing us the best and working to get us there, because that encouragement is so important when you're spending all this time going, oh no, something else didn't work. So that's the thing that I think people don't understand. We tend to highlight our successes, and popular media highlights, oh yeah, they can do this in an hour. And you don't realize that it takes years actually to get there, and years of things not working before finally something actually comes true. So
Yeah, absolutely. I have definitely learned that it takes a lot of dedication and tenacity from our cancer
yes,
researchers to do what they
yes,
do. So,
yes.
yeah. And so also I wanted to pause here to let those watching know that we're going to be covering this topic a little bit more in depth next month. And Simon Says that Cancer Research 101 is the topic. Dr. Lee will be back for that session, so make sure you join us next month to learn more about that inner working of cancer research.
It's messy and ugly.
Yeah, for sure. So this next question truly fits right in with what you were just saying. So this person noted that it seems like we would be further down the line with more standard of care use with immunotherapy by now. So they wanted to ask, why haven't we made faster progress with immunotherapies?
That's a great question. Being an immunologist by training and background, we actually the cancer immunology field has been around for 60, 80, 100 years. And I would say that the cancer immunologists have always believed they've always believed that cancer was going to make a great impact on cancer. But I would say even 10 years ago, nobody believed it, right? Or 15 years ago, everything was, all right, we're going to sequence the genome and we're going to do precision medicine. And oh, who cares about the immunology piece? And so it was actually a series of accidents or actually very insightful insights that actually moved the cancer immunotherapy forward. One was the very first trial of a vaccine against prostate cancer was done by Dendreon. And they showed that you could give the vaccine, but it didn't actually make the prostate cancer smaller. It didn't actually, shrink the tumors at all. So everybody thought that that trial was a failure. But the scientists looking at that went back and say, "Hey, the cancers didn't get smaller, but interestingly enough, people lived longer. Okay. And that was something that, we don't actually measure very often in a clinical trial. How long does somebody live? This trial actually allowed to measure that. And they said, even though we didn't seem to actually, have the cancer shrink, people live longer. And then they asked the question why. And with the very first remarkable insight was the cancers didn't stop growing, but they grew a lot slower. So cancer in general kills you when it gets to a certain size. And if you stop it from growing as fast as it was, you can actually extend people's lives. And then all of a sudden, everybody realized all those clinical trials that we were doing immunotherapy in, that we were looking for tumors to shrink, maybe that was the wrong thing to look at. So I would say maybe 10 years ago, there was a sudden understanding that we had been looking at all those immunotherapy trials, which had been deemed to have failed, and we had been looking at them wrong. So that was the very first step. The second step is that the whole process of clinical trial and clinical trials advances is slow. And it is slow for regular chemotherapies, regular new agents. It's also slow for immunotherapies. And so that is something that a lot of people are looking at. How do we make this faster? How do we, how do we do this in such a way that we can accelerate those things and move it forward? The third piece is that immunotherapies for example, can be very complex and have to be made for individual patients. So the chimeric antigen receptor T cells, which have really revolutionized the treatment of blood cancers, including myeloma, including lymphoma, those have to be manufactured for individual patients and it takes about 4 months. So, and it's really expensive. I mean, drug companies, the companies that manufacture it charge about $600,000 for one dose. And so to do clinical trials with that kind of manufacturing challenge or hurdle is hard because one, you have to actually manufacture it for the individual patient, and then it takes time. And then if you want to do combination trials, take CAR T cells, add something else to them, that's a large, expensive logistically difficult trial to do. So there are logistical components that actually make immunotherapies harder to advance. Now, that having been said, there's a great amount of enthusiasm for them. So, again, 10 years ago, there was nothing in immunotherapy, and now we have a bazillion things and another bazillion things that are in the pipeline. So I expect to see that the pace of advances and clinical deployment of immunotherapies is going to increase, amazingly so.
Yeah, that's exciting. Okay, so there's several people watching who are particularly interested in multiple myeloma
Mhm.
research, and knowing that you are a multiple myeloma researcher, can you talk about recent progress made in improving survival outcomes for patients with multiple myeloma? And also for those who aren't familiar with multiple myeloma, can you give a brief intro into what it is?
Certainly. And multiple myeloma is an example where research has really accelerated remarkably over the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years. So, multiple myeloma is a blood cancer. It's a cancer of a particular kind of cell called a plasma cell, which is the cell in your body, your immune cell in your body that normally makes the antibodies that protect you from COVID, from influenza, from polio, from smallpox. And for some reason, it's not entirely clear why one of these plasma cells gets a genetic abnormality and begins to divide and get bigger. But it does it very slowly. There is one researcher, there's a whole bunch of pre-cancer syndromes associated with multiple myeloma. One of them is called monoclonal gammopathy of unknown significance. I'll come back to that in a little bit for another question. But it's thought that everybody that gets myeloma actually has this MGUS syndrome. And then one of the researchers who's currently at Memorial Sloan Kettering actually calculated through math that I have no understanding about how he did this. He actually calculated that abnormal plasma cell, that malignant plasma cell, developed when people were teenagers. So myeloma is a disease that we see in people that are in their 60s, but that cancer cell had been there since they were teenagers. And so the exciting things about myeloma really have been not only the new chemotherapies and novel therapeutics. So the proteasome inhibitors, really, bortezomib was the first, and now we have a whole series of those. The immunomodulatory drugs, Revlimid, and now pomalidomide, and a next generation of those called the CELMoDs, which are in phase 3 clinical trials right now that look incredibly promising. And then the whole development of the immunotherapies, the chimeric antigen receptor T cells really I would say the second major cancer that they shown incredible efficacy in was multiple myeloma. And one just note about how research really, if you're a cancer patient, you need access to research. So when I was at Roswell Park in Buffalo, go Sabres, we were part of the first phase 1 study, one of the first phase 1 studies of the CAR T cells directed against BCMA. And BCMA is a molecule on the surface of myeloma cells, and these T cells can see it and destroy them. So we were a phase 1 study, right? This was a study just to see, if you give it to people, what kind of side effects do they have? Is it tolerable? All right. So we were part of the first phase 1 study. We gave these CAR T cells to patients and who had seen everything else. Their myeloma had become resistant to everything else. There wasn't anything else that we could treat them on. We treated them on this phase 1 study, and we had patients with literally pounds of myeloma disappear completely within 2 to 4 weeks. So they were like 40% myeloma to the myeloma was gone in 4 weeks. It was remarkable. And nobody was expecting this. And that actually set off, the fact that those CAR T cells actually got approved by the FDA in record time, simply because the responses were so remarkable. And so that came to market. Usually we think that it takes 10, 15 years from a drug to go from phase one to FDA approval. I think this was 2 years, if not less. It was just remarkable. And that's the kind of progress that we're seeing in myeloma in a number of different fronts. Myeloma really does lead the way in getting new therapies approved quickly through the FDA, and other cancer sites are actually looking at myeloma going, how did they do that? How did they get this approved? But it really has been because we've got great advocates, we've got great scientists, and the progress has really been amazing.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about clinical trials.
Mhm.
Can you just talk about why clinical trials are so important in clinical research and for cancer?
So the short answer is that we don't cure everybody. And the question is, how do we cure everybody? And so clinical trials are really one set of clinical trials is to really look at new treatment approaches. And those are very important because we can do lots of things in a petri dish. We can do lots of things in mice. Most of that actually doesn't translate to people. It gets us in the ballpark, but we don't actually know what this is going to do in a person with cancer in terms of either having the cancer get smaller or stop growing, or actually what kind of side effects we're going to see. We can't tell until we get to clinical trials. And that's why clinical trials are so important. Other kinds of clinical trials are actually looking at for example, as clinical trials is not just people with, treating people with new forms of therapy with cancer. So there are a number of clinical trials are asking the question, do we need to treat as much as we're doing and give those people all those side effects? Or are there ways that we actually can get the same result, the same good result, by treating people less intensively or picking populations that might suffer if we use a particular kind of therapy? That is work that our breast cancer group has really done that is now part of the national guidelines in picking kinds of chemotherapy for example, for African American women to avoid some of the really bad side effects that those chemotherapies can cause in our Black population that's not seen in other populations. So there's those, and then there are the other large clinical trials that are actually asking the question, can we prevent cancer? And what's the best way to do that? What's the best way to actually get people screened for colon cancer, for lung cancer? Are there strategies there? So clinical trials are really answering a lot of important scientific questions, but specifically, does this matter in people? We can actually look at lots of other things, digital models, mice, petri dishes, but really it comes down to the only way to know if it matters in a person is to actually test it in people. And the clinical trials are designed to be very, very thorough, careful, protect the patient's rights, and make sure that the information we get from the clinical trial is useful and well documented and all those things to allow us to answer those questions.
Yeah. So more about clinical trials. Um, this next question, the person wanted to know, what are we doing now to encourage more clinical trial participation in areas that are underrepresented and still at high risk for cancer?
That's a great question, and that's a challenge that all the cancer centers across the United States are facing. I think that we at Simon have teams of people that actually specifically work on that in our Office of Community Outreach and Engagement that are specifically involved in clinical trials. And how do we, what are strategies to bring in underrepresented groups, which are racial, ethnic, and actually geographical. So our rural populations tend to be underrepresented in our clinical trials also. How do we bring them in? How do we go out to the community and actually do education and say this is important? Because like you heard me say, if you're a cancer patient, regardless of your race, ethnicity, where you live, if you don't have access to clinical trials, you are getting second-rate medicine. So how do we educate our communities that this is important. This is what it means. This is what we're talking about in a particular clinical trial, prostate cancer, breast, multiple myeloma. But the other very important thing is how do we give those communities access, right? If you live in Fishers and you are asked to drive downtown to University Hospital, the very first thing all our patients say, "Oh my God, the parking's awful." And this is not even a underrepresented population. It's like the access piece really does matter. And so one of our big efforts is really to get the clinical trials out to where people live. And that requires thought and care. Obviously, you can't do a clinical trial that's incredibly complicated out in a community hospital, but you can do extraordinarily important, they're called pragmatic trials, out in the community setting, out in where people live. And then with new technology that allows us to monitor people at home, and soon your Apple Watch will tell us everything we need to know about you so you can be in a clinical trial. That actually helps also. So there is technology to actually allow people to do clinical trials at home, and that's really, or where they live, and that's really the second most important piece of how do we do access. And that's very much part of what our partnership with IU Health is looking at, is not only the clinical trials themselves, but how do we do the infrastructure to be able to do those kind of clinical trials, and how do we, increase the complexity of those trials out in the communities that we serve?
Yeah. Okay, so next question. There's a lot of information about cancer online. Everyone joining today clearly wants to learn more about cancer and cancer research. So, what advice would you have for how people can tell what information they find online is credible? And then also, are there any myths about cancer or cancer research that you would like to clear up today?
Okay, so one myth is that we've cured cancer and we're just not telling you because we want to make money off of that. I happen to not be making money off of cancer in any sense of the way. So that's not true. The other thing that's important to remember for cancer research is that really we come from a place, if we're good and we're honest, we come from a place that we don't know anything, right? And we need to see the data. We need to do the studies, the laboratory research, the clinical trials to convince us that this is actually the answer to a question. And in a very polarized, media environment these days, there's a lot, and I'll give you a specific example. There's a lot of things that people have now sort of set in their mind that, hey, this doesn't work. This is all fake, right? And one of them is mRNA vaccines, right? So mRNA vaccines, basis for the COVID vaccine. I think it was a miracle that they got that whole thing done in a year during a pandemic. But there's a lot of internet stuff out there that says, "Oh, these are all fake. This doesn't happen." It was just reported this week at the American Association of Cancer Research, which is a big cancer research conference. It's in San Diego, that there's an mRNA vaccine that appears to work in pancreatic cancer. The most difficult cancer to treat. My mom passed away from pancreatic cancer, the most difficult cancer to treat. And we have an mRNA vaccine that appears to actually clinically double, or actually clinically improve the time. I think it was actually double, although don't quote me on that. Time that people live with pancreatic cancer. This is remarkable. There's nothing been like that at all. If we had said, "Oh, mRNA vaccines don't work," and we had just abandoned all that research, that would have never happened. So I think that the important thing for cancer, both for the cancer researchers and cancer patients and their families and people that are interested in cancer, is to keep an open mind, because a huge advance might come from nowhere, that it was a complete accident that happened. One specific example was actually the checkpoint inhibitors, so Ninlaro and pembrolizumab. You see it on television for lung cancer. The reason that it was tested in lung cancer was not because somebody thought, hey, that's a great cancer to try it in, because nobody thought the immune system did anything to lung cancers. It happened because one investigator who really knew about checkpoint inhibitors was at an institution that had a really good lung cancer group and simply said to one of the lung cancer docs, hey, I have an antibody that blocks the checkpoints. Why don't you try it in your lung cancer patients? You don't have anything for them anyways. So there was no scientific basis for this. They just tried it, and it was a miraculous response. I mean, you had response rates that were way higher than chemotherapy and really did and that it resulted in a Nobel Prize for that work, but really set the immunotherapy field on the path that it's on now, accelerated the advances. But that was an accident, right? That was just a happen chance that they did that and it worked. So I think that one of the key things for cancer and everybody is to keep an open mind about where the next great answer is coming from. So where should you get your information? Well, I mean, there's a lot of really bad information out there, but the really good information comes from the national societies that are focused on cancer. So the American Association for Clinical Research is a huge national organization of cancer researchers. The American Society of Clinical Oncology, a huge organization of physicians that are doing clinical research in oncology. The American Society of Hematology, another huge organization looking at blood cancers and blood diseases. Your cancer center. Your cancer center is another great source of information that's been vetted and looked at closely. And so and then there are great national foundations, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I think they're Blood Cancers, yeah, United now. They changed their name, the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. A lot of your major foundations that are focused on particular cancers, those are great sources of information also. And your physician, your oncologist knows, and can help sort out myth and just bad information from what we really know.
Yeah, yeah, that was great advice. Okay, so we're going to kind of switch gears now. There were a couple of questions about funding and financial support for the Cancer Center.
Yes.
So first question was, how much financial support does the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center get from the state of Indiana?
So we get currently nothing. We get $0. And in comparison, in Texas, the state of Texas allocates, I think, about $6 billion a year to cancer research and its cancer centers. The state of Maryland allocates, I think, at least $12 million a year directly to their NCI designated cancer center, and another 220 million, I think they've allocated over the last 5 years. So some states are actually supporting cancer research quite dramatically. And the state of North Carolina has actually calculated the return on investment for every dollar the state spends on cancer and cancer research. They get $12 back in economic benefit. So there is also components of workforce development, and there are real efforts, real advantages to do that. Now, that having been said, we have been working very closely with our advocates on the pediatric side, on the breast cancer side, and the state government to actually move the needle forward in the state of Indiana. So last year we had a bill that was passed that established a state research fund for pediatric cancer research and breast cancer research. They didn't put any money in it. That's this budget cycle's effort. But there's now a lot of interest in supporting that, because not only is it good for Hoosiers, right? It not only does it develop new approaches to treat Hoosiers and new ways to get critical therapy out to them, it also builds the economy. You'd look actually at Indy and say, we have a huge pharma base, and that happened really, in the absence of cancer research support from the state. Can you imagine what it would be like if we had that support? We get no funding from the state of Indiana. The Simon doesn't, compared to, say, Moffitt. Moffitt in Florida gets $30 million a year. Can you imagine what this cancer center would be like if we got $30 million a year, it would be incredible. The advances, I think, would be tremendous. So we're doing amazing work. We're as good as any other cancer center in the country. We're doing amazing work in the absence of, currently, in the absence of state funding, but we expect to hopefully over the next year change that. And anybody on the call wants to call their legislator and say, you should support this. This is a great thing to support.
Yeah. So follow-up question then. Can you explain what the primary sources of funding are for the Cancer Center and how that has changed in recent years?
So really, it's mostly, I would say that it has been primarily philanthropy and grants and contracts. So many of the grants, the Cancer Center investigators in total have about $45 million a year in grant funding. Now, that actually all goes to the researchers, which it should, and the indirect costs, the costs that are built in to support the infrastructure really currently go to the departments and other organizations. So none of that, despite the fact that you will hear, oh gosh, the Cancer Center has $45 million in grants, we don't actually see any of that. That really goes to other parts of the school. But there is some indirect costs that come back to us in other areas. But it's relatively small, primarily philanthropy. Over the last year, I would say that over the last 5 years, there has been increased investment from the IU Health in our partnership. There's also been increased investment from the School of Medicine to help us move all those things forward. And as part of what we're doing, we are working on diversifying diversifying, for lack of a better word, income as to money that comes to the Cancer Center that allows us to do the things that we really want to do.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting kind of close to our time. So we still have a few more questions. So let's mix it up a little bit and maybe wrap up with some quick fire questions. So I'm going
Okay.
to challenge you, Dr. Lee, to
All right.
answer in a few words or just a sentence. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So
This is going to be very hard for me.
I know. This will be fun though. Okay, so first off, what are some promising areas of cancer research right now?
Cancer interception. How do we prevent somebody from getting cancer? So the best way to cure cancer is for you not to get it. And so if we know that you have an abnormal myeloma cell when you were a teenager, how do we prevent that myeloma cell from becoming myeloma?
Great. All right, next one. What are some challenges facing researchers right now that the public may not realize?
I think the public realizes that, I mean, the major challenge really is the funding uncertainty. And I would say that even though the appropriations bills has passed, there's still a lot of uncertainty in that. And that affects cancer researchers in general, but in particular, it affects our young faculty because, they're questioning, did I make the right life choice? With such uncertainty around. So that still remains a major challenge. And again, if you're on this call and you want to talk to your legislator, talk to them about this.
Great. Okay, if you could answer one big question about cancer tomorrow, what would it be?
To go back to how do we prevent it? I mean, we've done great work in tobacco control, which has lowered the incidence of lung cancer. But the question is, how do we, for all the people that don't have cancer yet but might get it, how do we prevent it? And there are lots of different strategies looking at how we actually do that.
Yeah. And then what gives you the most hope when you think about the next 5 or 10 years in cancer research?
Two things. All of you on this call, it is so encouraging that people are interested, excited, and support this. And so tell your friends and family. Second is the people that do the work. Not only the researchers who, like I said, are slaving away at midnight at another failed experiment, number 9 of 10, that are still going there saying to themselves, well, I could give up, but we have lives to save. So we want to do that. And then all of the people that support those researchers in that effort, our executive assistants, our program managers, our nurses, the medical staff that rooms patients, all of that, our clinical trials office, all of those people are so dedicated. And that's what gives me the greatest hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So finally, since you spent our lunch hour with us, Dr. Lee, I have to ask you, what are you having for lunch today?
All right. So I didn't know this was going to happen until this morning, but our friends at Cluster Truck, who are right here in Indianapolis, are doing something pretty special. They're right now they're donating 20% of what they get from the sales of 3 specialty burgers. I can't remember I've got one of them to support research at the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center. So today, Cluster Truck here, I am trying the Nate Spangle burger. And Candice, you have info on Nate Spangle and why he's important for Indiana.
I do know all about Nate Spangle. So that one's the one that's named for the host of the Get In podcast. So Nate Spangle hosts this great podcast called Get In, and it's all about inspiring Hoosiers. And so I actually saw a little bit about this burger this morning on Instagram. And so Nate's burger is topped with peanut butter, bacon, lettuce, tomato, and jalapeno. There it is. So I'm told, Dr. Lee, that Nate is going to make a personal donation based on your review.
So I have to say good things about it.
Well, let's take a bite and let's see. So, I mean, I suppose
It
that it
smells
requires a
great.
taste
It
test.
looks great. Wow.
All right. He's making yummy sounds.
This,
So-
this is great. Okay. Peanut butter. I'm spitting food all over my keyboard. All right,
That's
the
fine.
peanut butter, it's a great burger. I think it's locally sourced beef, but the peanut butter reminds me of being Elvis Presley. And so I got that feel. And the fried jalapenos are great. This is a
Yeah.
great burger. I would tell everybody, go to Cluster Truck and get one of these, or get all 3 of them. The other ones look great also, but this is a great burger. All right, I'm
Yeah.
gonna eat this later because
Yeah.
if I keep stuffing it in my face, I won't be able to say anything. But these
I mean,
jalapenos are wonderful.
I think that's a good review that you want to just keep stuffing it
Oh
in.
yeah.
Yeah. And I've never had peanut butter on a burger. How was it? I'm
It
interested.
it kind of it meshes with the creaminess of the cheese.
Yeah.
So then you have the crunchiness of the bacon and the lettuce, and then the zing of and the burger's great, beef's great, and then the zing of the jalapenos on top of it. It's phenomenal.
Nice. Well, I will be trying one for lunch soon too then. So,
Outstanding.
so
Outstanding.
yeah. So to wrap up here, I want to again thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you to Cluster Truck, of course. And I wanted to share with everyone that you can, of course, visit clustertruck.com to see if delivery is available in your area, and also to learn about the other 3 specialty burgers, and to let everyone know that purchase between now and May 31st. If you purchase one of those burgers, 20% of proceeds will go directly to cancer research at IU, which is awesome.
Outstanding.
So, yeah.
Candice, can you remind everybody what the Cancer Center's website address is?
Yeah, absolutely. Learn more about the Cancer Center at cancer.iu.edu. And I also just want to go ahead and thank everyone for joining this month's Simon Says and for all of your thoughtful questions. We really hope to see you at future Cancer Center events. And you can also find a recording of today's sessions, past sessions, and information about upcoming sessions at cancer.iu.edu/Simon Says.
Outstanding. Thank you all. Please keep asking questions. Email those to us because I think that people that don't do what we do, that aren't sort of narrowly focused on it, people from the outside have great observations. They have great ideas. They say, why didn't you do this? Or why don't you think about that? And that's part of really the amazing thing about research is that good ideas come from everywhere and from everybody. And so I would encourage everybody to go to the Cancer Center website. It has all the latest stuff that we're doing. They have the clinical trials updates and all that aspects from STEM to STERN. And again, talk to us. Let us know. email Candace. It's like I just put more work on
Absolutely.
Candace's. Yeah, let us know what you think and what you think we should be doing or trying or looking into, because I think having that feedback is really one of the more wonderful things about being in a cancer center and the cancer center director.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much, Dr. Lee, and thanks to everyone who joined today, and have a great day.
All right, great. I'm going to finish this burger, but I got to turn off
Yes.
my camera because it's going to get messy. Bye now.
See ya. Thanks.